Trauma isn't what happens to you. It's what happens inside you. It's when you're alone with your pain and sadness, so you can't process it and move through it.
Is it possible to raise your children without trauma?
Life is inherently painful. You can't protect children from that, nor should you try to. What you can do, though, is help them experience it accompanied by a nurturing adult.
All addictive behavior can be traced back to childhood trauma. That's something you assert.
Not everybody who's traumatized becomes addicted, but everyone addicted was traumatized. My major addiction has been to work. The work is so seductive precisely because it's so appreciated by the world. If I think I'm not enough, then I want more and more validation for the world that I'm enough. And my wife said to me, look, you gotta realize you're a workaholic because I'm not putting up with it anymore. So I really had to make a decision.
I definitely struggle with this problem. In August, I had 2 weeks off and I couldn't be the holiday dad.
I'm not sure that you want to stay that way for the rest of your life because you got these 2 young kids. What's the message to them? And that is restless.
That it's their fault.
Yeah, that's somehow they're not adequate. And when you're restless and unhappy around your kids, they get a message that it's about them. I know there's more to me than just my addicted self, but despite all the teaching that I do, I haven't taught myself. And that represents a kind of powerlessness. And you gotta start with admitting that. That is the first step. So this is a highly traumatized society. This is the world in which there's even more need for painful inquiry. We have the capacity within ourselves to turn this around. The answers are all within you. And if you need guidance, it's not how to negotiate the world out there. It's how to negotiate the world within.
They say that the human race is doomed, that we have lost touch with our true nature, that the media has corrupted us, and that the planet has no future. I disagree. I believe that humanity is full of hope, and that our salvation lies within each one of us. My name is Brian Rose, and my job is to listen, the oldest method of learning known to man. Each week I seek out individuals that are changing the world, people who are living and thinking in a different way. Their stories will challenge your beliefs, make you question your choices, and perhaps inspire you to change. I never planned on doing any of this, but now I can't stop. Join me on this mission and make humanity something we can all be proud of.
People call Dr. Gabor Maté the people whisperer because he really knows what's going on in your head. And he's got that voice that makes you just want to talk. And that's what I did on this episode, just like my first episode with Gabor. I started talking about my own problems and my own issues. On the first episode, I talked about my struggle with addiction, my ayahuasca ceremony, and my trauma as a 7-year-old boy. That went into the movie Iron Mind. This episode, I talk about parenting, being a workaholic, and we talked about some of his own addictions. And I know you're really going to enjoy this sit down with him. He also talked about the movie Iron Mind, which he starred in, and his thoughts on John Joseph and how he deals with his traumas, and even me. So I love Gabor. He's a real gift and a treasure to all of us here, and I know you're going to enjoy this episode. And inside London Real Academy, it's crazy. We're wrapping up our Life Accelerator. I'm going to spend 8 weeks and take people from around the world through a system to help them crush 2019. And we're ramping up for our Business Accelerator, where I teach anyone how to start a business in 8 weeks. I look forward to seeing you there.
London Real doesn't stop when the conversation ends. You see, that's when we get started. Because everything begins with a thought, and then comes the action. The London Real Academy is our global transformation platform. Here we bring together thousands of students from over 75 countries. Whether you want to build a profitable business from your passion, or learn to speak to inspire, or broadcast yourself with your very own podcast, or accelerate your life to become a high-performance person, we have the online accountability course and personal mentoring program that will make your dream a reality. Join us, and we'll take your life to the next level together. Our next accelerator course is starting soon.
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Gabor Maté, the renowned speaker, physician, and author. You've written many best-selling books, including In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction, which is based on your findings from 12 years practicing medicine in Vancouver's most concentrated area of drug users. You're also known for your expertise on child trauma, stress, and the mind-body connection. Your work reframes how we view all human development. Gabor, welcome back to London Real.
What a pleasure to be back. Thank you.
Huge pleasure to have you here. We have so much to talk about today, but first, let's talk about that pin on your lapel there. What does that signify?
Thanks for giving me bragging rights. This pin represents the Order of Canada, which is Canada's highest civilian distinction. It's kind of the Canadian equivalent of the MBE. And I got it this year for my work on trauma and addiction and mind-body health. So I was so pleased to get it because, not because of the personal distinction, which is nice, but because of the recognition of the work. It just means that an understanding of trauma and a more humane approach to human beings is actually now being recognized by the mainstream in a deeper way. So I was very pleased to get it.
Yeah, and did that surprise you? Because it always seemed like the mainstream was slow to accept some of your ideas.
It was a very pleasant surprise, yeah.
Okay.
Only what I should have gotten years ago, but.
Right, right. And was that in the workings, or did they just surprise you?
I didn't know anything about it.
Okay.
I just got this email all of a sudden from the Governor General's office.
Wow, that's exciting. 20 years earlier would have been better, but that's not a bad start.
You know what? Everything in its own time. 20 years ago would not have been better because it would have gone to my head, which is already big enough as it is. So it came at the right time.
Well, we got a lot to talk about today. I want to talk about parenting. I want to
Yeah.
talk about plant medicines.
Yeah.
I want to talk about trauma and mind-body connection.
Yeah.
I also want to talk about how I hijacked you and put you in our latest movie, Iron Mind. I know you've watched it, and I want to talk about that and John
Sure.
Joseph. Before we get to all that, how have you been and where have you been the last year and a half? I think last time you were here, I thought you were slowing down a little bit, but it doesn't look like you have.
So you want to know the sordid tale behind my last visit? The last time I was here in London was in June of 2016. And I was here on a speaking trip. I gave 2 lectures, 2 day-long lectures, very well received. A lot of gratitude, standing ovation, and all that. And I was here with my wife, and we were going to have a holiday around this speaking visit. And we love London, and we had the most miserable time of our lives because I was totally depleted from all the work I'd done here and elsewhere. And literally, we had a terrible time, and we've been married. This year it'll be 49 years.
Wow.
And my wife said to me, literally she said to me, addressing my workaholism, she said, look, you gotta realize you're a workaholic. She says, you've written a book called When the Body Says No. Now you better write one called When the Wife Says No, because I'm not putting up with it anymore. And that was right here in London.
Wow.
And she actually watched the interview you did with me. And she said to me, you looked so calm and collected and articulate. Who the hell is that person in your real life? And so that challenged me. And so I really had to make a decision of what kind of life do I really want. Now the work is very satisfying, and there's a lot of appreciation for it out there in the world. But at the same time, if I identify with it, if I make it my identity and who I am, I deplete myself and I suffer, and I impose suffering in my primary relationship as well. So I've really had to look at my life. So I have slowed down, and may not look like it this last couple of months, but literally now every invitation I get has to be vetted and approved by my wife, which is not a matter of yielding control to her. It's a matter of recognizing that I need support in making these decisions. And as a result of that, I'm enjoying life a lot more. I've just signed a contract to write 2 new books, which means I'll have to stay home a lot more and actually do the writing. So It was right here in London that we had the crisis that, the Chinese word for crisis is made up of two anagrams. One is for danger, the other is for opportunity. So in every crisis, there's a danger, there's an opportunity. And at the beginning of your movie, Iron Mind, John Joseph says that we have to suffer to seek the truth. Some words to that effect. And whether he knows it or not, he's quoting the great Greek playwright Aeschylus, who in his Agamemnon, the chorus says, "We human beings suffering to truth." So literally, it was that suffering imposed by my workaholism that led me to have to make decisions and to understand the truth. And therefore, I feel a lot happier than I did when I was here last time.
I'm glad I could facilitate that crescendo.
Thank you very much.
How could you turn it on for our interview, which, many, hundreds of thousands of people have watched, and it meant a lot to people. How can you be that Gabor Maté in the orange jumper that's just dropping knowledge, and then go home and be completely lost of emotion and connection?
Is that dynamic a surprise to you? Is it not? Do you not know it yourself?
No, I do.
Yeah. Eckhart Tolle, the spiritual teacher, says that some people can embody what he calls being, where they're really truly present and channel truth in their professional work, but they haven't integrated it into their personal lives. And I've been one of those cases where literally my wife sometimes has said, I'm married to a split personality. And I've also realized that, by the way, through some work that I've done recently, that all of us we all have multiple personalities. The so-called multiple personality disorder is just at the extreme end of the scale, where the personalities don't even know each other. But inside you and inside myself, there are multiple, it's like an internal family. And it's a question of which aspect dominates. So one aspect dominates when I'm sitting here talking with you, feeling very comfortable and competent. It's quite another when depleted I go home and now I expect my wife to give me the energy and the happiness that I've deprived myself of.
Right. And so what does that look like? You just go quiet and silent and going deep or depressed, or what does that look like?
Depressed, alienated, irritable, reactive, blaming. I've been able to get that way, and fortunately, I'm married to somebody who will not absorb and put up with that.
Right.
But will call me on it.
It's not a codependent relationship. She'll call you.
Well, she recognized her codependency.
Okay.
And she said, "That's it, no more."
Huh. What is the expression? Physician, heal thyself.
Yeah.
So how does an addict fix their own addiction? It's usually an impossible thing.
Well, I mean, I do think that, although I'm not a 12-stepper myself, I do think that the first step, where you admit your powerlessness, where you admit that this is bigger than me, that it's bigger than the stratagems and the knowledge and best efforts of the little ego. You got to get that this is bigger than me. You have to just really admit that you've been powerless. I said to sit here in London, in the apartment that we're staying at, and admit that I've been powerless over my workaholism. That despite all the teaching that I do and all the people that express their appreciation for what they learned from me, I haven't taught myself. And that represents a kind of powerlessness. And you got to start with admitting that. That is the first step.
Right. And the next step is giving up control to someone else or to her to try to make steps to make a change. Because admitting it's not enough.
Well, that's the first step. The second step is where they talk about the higher power and actually recognizing that there is a higher power. Now, people can call that God. I'm not a religious person, and I'm not comfortable with the God terminology, which to me has a lot of negative and oppressive connotations or delusional now some people that word works. More power to them. But I know there's more to me than just my addicted self. So that in this internal multiplicity of Gabors, there is a true self that is capable of being present and aware and fair-minded and committed to truth. And that's what you ask for help from. And you get the support for that. Now, in my case, I had great support from my spouse. but also, of course, spiritual teachers, and I found, not surprisingly, I'm not a guru person, but I did meet a Hindu guru who has a yoga program, and I'm not a follower, but I learned the yoga, and I'm doing that regularly now, which, again, I'm looking for something higher, because yoga means unity. So...
How was the yoga? Have you done it before?
I've always said I'm not a yoga person. I militantly refuse to do yoga.
Good negative affirmation there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I learned this yoga program, and I'm not here to advocate for it, but it's called Inner Engineering, and it's about 45 minutes a day, and I don't have to go to a class. I do it myself at home. I do it in my hotel room, and when I do it, I'm more balanced, I'm more grounded, I'm less driven, I'm less reactive. And if I don't do it for a while, I notice the negative change.
Okay.
So again, there's something higher than just my little mind.
Okay. So I went on holiday this year, and of course, in typical Gabor Maté fashion, he's getting me to talk about myself right away. So thank you. But in August, I had 2 weeks off, and 1 week I spent with some family in like kind of a weird camp place in Germany, and the next week was in Bordeaux, which I think they should rename to Boring.
Really?
Because
Okay.
I got there, and my 2 boys and my stepdaughter and everybody, and I'll be honest, 4 days later, I left and flew back to London alone because I couldn't be the holiday dad. I didn't know what to do with myself. And I was even watching myself do it. And I was like, okay, let's try a different frame of mind. What's the problem? You need to be comfortable in a new... I mean, I was trying to heal myself, and I couldn't do it. And I tapped out, as they would say in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I came home. So I definitely struggle with this problem. And
What was on your mind when you were in Bordeaux?
I just felt like I couldn't do anything. And then I said to myself, but you don't, like Gabor would say, you don't have to be doing something. You can just be. But while I knew that logically was true, I still felt this kind of, I don't know, restlessness. And I was like, okay, focus on the kids or this or that, or use this time to do something else or learn or explore. But I just couldn't get this uneasy feeling of things I needed to do. And so at some point, I finally had to admit that I still felt this way, and I was not getting a solution, and it was getting worse. So I ejected.
Well, okay. If you could recognize in that experience that there's something that's still missing for you in terms of your self-awareness, then that could be a teaching experience. You know, and I know that holiday boredom that you described. And when I go on holiday, it actually takes me a while to relax into it. Now the problem is when you're with 5 other people or 4 other people, and you also have to be there for them, when you can't even be there for yourself, then you have a real dilemma. And you're either pretending to be the holiday dad, or you're being miserable. I understand the dilemma. But I'm not sure that you want to stay that way for the rest of your life, because you got these 2 young kids, and what's the message to them? And that is restless around them.
That it's their fault.
Yeah. That's somewhat not adequate, which happens to be your particular life story. I remember from our last conversation, and also from your movie.
So I'm persisting this throughout the generations.
So that this is how we pass it on. And Thich Nhat Hanh, the spiritual teacher, the Buddhist teacher, said that the greatest gift a parent can give to their child is his or her own happiness. And when you're restless and unhappy around your kids, as I have been, they get a message that it's about them. So that's something good to recognize, as long as you take it on as a challenge.
And you know, I know you have a whole book on this, and I'm ordering on Audible tonight.
Yeah.
But things to think about when it comes to my relationship with my children is that first lesson of happiness is the greatest gift I can give them.
Yeah.
Those first 7 years are very important. Are there other things?
Actually, the first 7 years are crucial. I would say the first 3 years are the nub of it. I always say to people, you get the first 3 years right, you can relax. If you don't get the first 3 years right, you'll be practicing remedial parenting for decades. And that's just how it works.
First 3 years, so I got 6 months left with my first son, Caden.
Well, I'm sure you didn't screw it all up.
And, and what does screwing it up look like? And how would you know?
Well, so, well, first of all, you'd know because there I am with my son, and I'm not finding rest in it. So I don't know how to be there with him. I don't know how to be there for him. And I was like that, you know? And I was always waiting for my kids to grow older when I could intellectually engage them. And now we'll have something in common. But the sheer act of being, or the sheer state of being, I could never achieve with them. And it's interesting because I look at my brothers. They're so wonderful with little kids. They're so spontaneously there for them. I never knew how to do that, you know?
So while you're busy waiting for them to get old enough to talk and engage,
Yeah.
you've already missed the window.
You already missed it. You missed it because you haven't developed, because the real relationship doesn't depend on words. It depends on the capacity to be with.
And they can sense just that energy from you. I'm just here with you,
Yeah.
and I'm here.
And I welcome your presence.
Right.
And I welcome you to exist in my presence. And I'm overjoyed to have you in my presence.
Right.
That's what the child needs from the parent.
And that's communicated with body language and everything.
And to the energy that you exude.
And they can feel it.
They can absolutely feel it.
Wow.
They can't name it, but they can feel it.
Okay. And that already starts changing their personality right there.
That shapes their personality.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's in the first few years. And so you were waiting to intellectually engage, which makes sense. They always say that mothers form a different bond than fathers. Is that just another way, an anachronism?
Mothers form a different bond, but only because mothers are present with their kids. Whereas the fathers tend to visit the kids. I mean, you know, the father goes to work typically and then visits at home for a couple of hours and then takes off again next morning. Those fathers who stay home with their kids, they learn how to mother their kids. So it's not a gender issue, it's a relational issue. And the mothers allow themselves to be trained by the kids, whereas the fathers tend to impose their own expectations on the kid.
Okay.
This is not universal, I'm talking by and large. So those fathers who have the good fortune, like in the civilized countries where parents are given paternity leave,
Right.
those fathers learn to relate to their kids in a different way than the average father somewhere else.
Okay.
We can be trained, but we have to be present for the training.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I do think of this sometimes. I was in situations where he's 1 and 2 years old and I'm thinking, I don't know what to do here. I don't want to be here. And then sometimes I was just like, just breathe and just be here for him, you know?
Okay.
Even if he's playing, just be here. So
When you say, what do you mean even if he's playing?
what's that?
What do you mean
Well,
even if he's playing?
If he's doing something that seems like I'm not involved,
Oh, but you are involved.
I know.
It's your presence
Yeah.
that gives him security that he can play on his own.
Right, okay.
The anxious child cannot play on his own, or he'll play on his own as a way of protecting himself. What you actually, like when you actually look at animals play, the cubs play all the time, and play is a preparation for life, but it happens in the protective presence of the parents.
Right. So we're there to give them that time to develop in that way with other
Exactly.
kids and everything.
You're there to give them that space. Yeah.
Okay. So some basic lessons are give them the gift of happiness, be present.
Yeah.
Even if you can't verbally communicate, that's not even the most important part. Just be there.
Not even if. You can't verbally communicate because the 2-month-old, the 3-month-old, the 6-month-old doesn't understand words anyway.
Yeah.
So the communication happens on a much deeper level.
Okay. And the name of this book, if people want to get it?
Well, the name of the parenting book that I co-wrote is called Hold On to Your Kids, Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. And that's been published in over 20 languages internationally and is being published in England in January. And what it's about is that in our culture, the children have a need to attach. They have a need to connect with somebody, because without that connection, they don't survive. And in the hunter-gatherer bands where human beings evolved, those attachments were with adults. And not just one adult or 2 adults, but with a whole set of nurturing adults. Now in our culture, we've deprived the kids of the parental presence for the most part. And the child's brain can't handle an attachment void where there's no attachment figure. And in the absence of the parent or the nurturing adult, the child will fill that void with the peer group. Now kids become far more peer attached than is healthy for them. And now peers become their models and their mentors and their templates for how to be, how to walk, and how to talk. And as that happens, the kids push away from the parents because they're more minded to belong to the peer group, which has different values from the parents. And the kid's brain can't handle that competition. So the brain of the child will actually choose the peer group over the parent group. And where that goes, you can see on Facebook, and you can see it in the teenage gangs, and you can see it in the increasing frustration of parents who've lost the power to parent, because parents think that their power to parent comes from the fact that they have the responsibility and the strength and the wisdom. It doesn't come from that. The power to parent comes from the desire of the child to belong to you. When the child is driven to belong to the peer group, because we've taken him out of his natural context, we lose the power to parent. What do we do then? We ratchet up the pressure. We become more authoritarian. We lose the authority, so we become authoritarian. And the more authoritarian we become, the more pressure we put on them, the more they resist. And now we label them with oppositional defiant disorder, and we call them obstreperous and bad and naughty kids. All they're doing is acting out their attachment dynamics. So if we want to discipline kids, we actually have to make them our disciples. And the disciple is not somebody who's afraid of you. The disciple is somebody who loves you and wants to belong to you and follow you. So discipline is the very opposite of punishment.
Mm. And how do you do that with your kids?
Well, first of all, you realize that the most important template, in fact, the essential template for the emotional development of the child, as well as for the brain's healthy physiological development, is a nurturing relationship with mutually responsive adults. That is the template for physiological brain development and healthy psychological development. That means that anything that you do that undermines the relationship with the child will actually undermine the child's development, because it makes the child insecure, and kids in state of insecurity are in defensive flight or fight mode, in which mode they don't learn anything. They just are defending. And so that every time I use the relationship against the child, so I have a 2-year-old who's angry, and most psychologists and parenting experts will tell you, time out. In other words, what they're telling you is withdraw the relationship from the child as a way of threatening the child. And that threat will make the child comply with you. Well, the child may temporarily comply with you, but what have you taught her? You've taught her that the relationship is conditional.
Right.
That they're only acceptable to you if they please you. Furthermore, you've taught them that relationships are unstable and unreliable. And you've learned, and they've learned, that you're not available for them when they're most upset. Because why is he acting out? Why is he throwing a tantrum? Because they're frustrated about something, because they're angry about something, because they're unhappy. And you say to them, when you're most unhappy, that's when I'm least available to you. And this is how parents are taught to parent. Furthermore, parents are taught not to pick up their kids when they're crying. Let them sleep it out, which is utterly noxious. Yeah. Because the child who you don't pick up, right, what lesson do they get? Their emotions don't matter. That's the lesson they get.
Okay.
And just the opposite of what any loving parent wants to teach.
Right.
So that the psychology, the parenting psychology in this culture has become anti-child. And as long as 70 years ago, this was already the case, Dr. Spock, who you might recall,
sure,
talked about the tyranny of the infant. Time out. Stop. And my mother, am I talking too long? Or
no, I love this.
Can I blather on?
Yeah.
Because I found my mother's diary recently. When I was 6 weeks old, and this is 1944, my mother is writing, "My poor little Gabor, you've been crying since 3 in the morning. My heart broke for you. But I couldn't pick you up to feed you until 5 o'clock because the doctors would be so angry with me, because I learned to feed you on schedule rather than on demand. And I didn't want to displease the doctors, so I had to let you cry for almost 2 hours. And finally at 4:45, my heart broke and I couldn't do it anymore, and I picked you up and fed you, but don't think I'll do it again." Now, what's the message to a 6 weeks old who's desperate for maternal contact, and this woman who absolutely adored me, who did everything she could to save my life under very difficult circumstances that I already talked to you about before, wartime Hungary, Nazi occupation, who absolutely loved me, and she's absolutely hurting me at the same time. And just how confusing that is for the infant. Now, you tell a mother bear to ignore the crying of the infant. You tell a mother cat to ignore the crying of the infant. Every fiber in my mother's being wanted to pick me up and nurture me, but because the doctors had told her not to. And this is how we tell parents now how to parent. We tell them to sleep train their kids by not picking them up. Hunter-gatherer tribes, you know what they do? They never even put their kids down. In the state of nature, creatures don't put their kids down.
Right. So stick to those fundamentals.
Stick to what we've
and
learned.
go what's in your gut as well. So when your kid has one of those tantrum moments, be with them, breathe with them, be with them.
Yeah, validate their feelings. Yeah, you know. No, that doesn't mean you're permissive. The kid wants a cookie before dinner, and you know better. You give him a cookie, he won't have dinner. You're not going to give him the cookie. But why shouldn't he be angry about it?
Right.
You know, why should I be threatened by his anger? Why should I call that naughty? Why should I call that the terrible twos? Oh, you're angry, you're really upset, you really wanted that cookie. Yeah. That's okay. Well, I'm so sorry. You know, after dinner, you know. In other words, you're not permissive, but you're also not demanding that the child suppress their feelings in order to be in your presence.
And you don't hold the relationship as ransom to them.
That's exactly
That's the dangerous
you
thing.
You don't use the relationship against them.
Okay. One thing my wife does is when Caden's when he has a meltdown sometimes. Sometimes on the sidewalk next to traffic, it's just gone. He melted down with me one time in the pool, and I mean he literally would have broken his skull against the side of the pool. He was just banging it so much that he lost all all sense of his own safety. And so she just talks to him. Okay, I know you're really angry, Caden, and that might take 5 minutes. But when he's talking, she's like, okay, I know you're really angry, but we need to go. So I understand you're angry, and he's like, ah, and she just tries to talk, and then after a while, he's listening, or he hears the tone.
That's the whole point. He's responding as much to the energy and the tone as he is to the words.
Right.
And what she's teaching him is self-regulation. He's actually teaching that you can go through these states, it's okay, they'll pass. And this is how self-regulation happens. Not by, you mustn't yell, you mustn't cry, you know, and so on, this kind of punitive and accusatory stuff. So your wife's doing intuitively what needs to be done.
Yeah, she's from Bulgaria, so she's, a little further from the West, so I think she's more intuitive. But yeah, I mean, and I think a couple times we tried the exploding when he explodes, and we quickly saw that did not work. Like getting angry with him for melting down, it's just like it's completely not.
Well, what she's doing is instead of a time out, she's giving a time in. She's actually giving him her energy and her concern and her presence at that time, which is exactly what the child needs.
Right.
And that way he'll learn self-regulation. Whereas when you react against his anger, all you're teaching him is self-suppression, which is not the same as self-regulation.
Okay, it's really powerful. Thank you for that. Also, I told you I got a stepdaughter when she was 6.
Right.
She's now 14. And you said some interesting things about stepchildren and stepfathers earlier.
Well, step is an interesting word, because why do we call them step-parents? Because they step into the role of the parent. And in this book, Hold On to Your Kids, what we point out is that parenting is not a role. It's a relationship. So sometimes, I don't know how it was for you, but I've seen very often the step-parent steps into the role and expects deference and compliance and love from the child. But why should the child offer them? She didn't ask you to marry her mother. That was her mother's decision, maybe for perfectly valid reasons, but let's not assume that the child is necessarily a party to it. And if you want to step into the role of parenting, you have to develop the relationship where the child wants to belong to you, where the child's attachment drive is directed towards you. And then you'll be the parent. But let's not assume that it's a role, that simply you can start doing the right things without a relationship. And Krishnamurti, the great teacher, said that the most important thing is relationship. And he said that without understanding relationship, any plan of action will only breed conflict. So it's that relationship that we have to get. So that 6-year-old whose mother married you at that age has already been through that difficult time because her parents divorced. Now, I don't need to know the circumstances, but I can tell you, no adults divorce without a fair bit of unhappiness. I mean, no two happy parents wake up Saturday morning and say, "It's been wonderful, I'm totally in love with you, goodbye." You know, there's usually a period of alienation and stress and struggle and rancor. And the child has to endure all that. And then the mother and the child has endured the loss, well, assuming that the father didn't die or something. But one way or the other, the child, the 6-year-old, has endured the loss. And then the mother says, so she's got some insecurity. I'm talking about the average case. I don't know about your daughter. But then you come along, and all of a sudden the mother forms a relationship with you. Why should that not be threatening to the child? She's already lost something, and all of a sudden there's a stranger in the home whom mommy really loves. Well, every reason she might perhaps perceive you as a threat. Now, maybe she didn't. Maybe you formed a great relationship with her right from the beginning, and maybe she welcomed you into the home. But it can easily work the other way. In other words, all I'm saying is we have to understand that the parents' relationship with one another is not immediately transferable to the child. That a relationship is to build with the child. And that's what then gives you the power to parent, is the relationship that the child wants to give you and maintain with you. The power of parenting comes from the desire of the child to belong to you.
Right.
And this is whether you're the step parent or the biological parent.
Okay. Yeah, I remember the first time I met Gabby, and we all went out for ice cream, the three of us, and she was looking at me like, "Who the hell is this guy?"
Mm-hmm.
And then I think at one point I took a scoop of her mom's ice cream and I ate it, and she said, "Why are you eating my mommy's ice cream?" And it was just like, oh, it was. She clocked it right away, and so.
Oh, good for her.
You know, but when I finally really I finally really started seeing her mother a lot, I really made an effort, and I would actually just have dates where I would pick up Gabby alone without her mom there, and we would go to the mall, and we're really invested. Actually, when we moved in together, I asked her permission. I said, "Would you like to move in with us?"
Wow.
And took her out to a coffee, and I was like, "I really want you to, but it's your call." And then she was just like, "Yeah, okay." So I was.
And you meant it. If she had said no, you wouldn't have done it?
Yeah, well, I mean, we would have had a real problem, right? So, yeah, maybe I would have had to go for a few more coffees. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I had a stepmother too, and so maybe I saw how she invested in me,
Right.
and I understood that dynamic, and I ended up really, getting close to her.
Right.
But she took time out for me too,
Right.
so maybe
Right.
that helped. Tell me about social media, because my boys aren't there yet. Although they can find their way to a laptop pretty quick, but they're not on social media. But my daughter is, of course.
Yeah.
Obviously, that peer group now is readily available in this new addictive device that's more addictive, I don't know if you would say, than heroin and cocaine.
It's very addictive, yes.
Okay. How does that, just up the stakes?
Well, so in a book, Hold On to Your Kids, the last 2 chapters are about the digital media. And it's a huge topic. And I would say if I had boys your kids' age, I would not let them near any device. I would not let them near a device.
That's what I heard that the Silicon Valley CEOs do. I heard that they tell their nannies they're not to see a device. You have to leave it in your car.
That's absolutely right.
Okay, tell me about
Not at that age. Because, first of all, the screen themselves are mesmerizing.
Yeah.
And the more time a kid spends, and they're addictive. You try and peel a kid off their device, you see typical addictive protest and outrage.
Yeah, anger,
all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Because you're really coming between the addict and their addiction. And you from your own addictive history, or me from mine, what it's like when somebody tries to come between you and your addictive target behavior. And
it's bad.
Sorry?
I mean, everything in your fiber of your being says no.
Absolutely.
Right.
Now, so first of all, the screens themselves affect the brain, the developing brain. So the more times a kid spends watching screens, the more it depletes their dopamine receptors. And dopamine receptors are the ones that get implicated in addiction later on, the incentive motivation circuitry of the brain. Number one. The child develops an attachment relationship with the machine. And then as they get older, this is with 1 and 2 or 3 or 4-year-olds. So what we say about the digital media is it's a good thing, but so is sex, and so is alcohol. But we don't give 2-year-olds alcohol, and we don't introduce 5-year-olds to sexual practices. Why? Because they're not ready to handle it. So you give digital media to kids when they're old enough to handle it. When are they old enough to handle it? When they no longer rely on it to meet their emotional needs, but they use it for the function for which it was developed, which is information and communication. Those are legitimate goals. But when kids are immature and their attachment needs have not been met yet, they can use the digital media to meet their attachment needs, which displaces real human attachments. So what happens on Facebook? Kids have friends. What happens on Facebook? Kids like each other. These are attachment dynamics, except the friends are not real friends. Because a real friend is somebody who really knows you intimately and accepts you and supports you and wants the best for you. These Facebook friendships are highly conditional, as shown by the fact that when people displease each other, they defriend each other. And the likes are not real likes, because what is being presented on digital media is a simulacrum of the real self. It's a self-chosen particle of who I really am. That's what shows up on Facebook. And so people like a part of me. But how does that satisfy my need to be accepted and respected and loved for who I really am? It actually undermines it. So the digital media is the very opposite of genuine human contact. Now, can it be used that way? Sure. If you got 2 young kids now, and if you got parents who live in the United States, and those kids want to connect with their grandparents, what a great device Skype is or Zoom is. Where now they can connect. It's not just a letter. It's actually, you know, there's the New York Times did an article about a 5-year-old who walks into this friend's house, sees a computer and says, "Hey, granddad," because he only met his granddad, or mostly through the, anyway, that's a great way to connect. Yeah. But who needs to be in charge of that? In other words, the digital media can be introduced to the child's life when the parents can stay in control of it. When the media takes over and the child has got this addictive relationship, the child is not ready for it. So we say, don't introduce it too early, number one, and number two, stay on top of it and you be in charge.
What kind of age are we talking here?
Well, we desist from giving a specific age only because each child matures at a different rate.
8, 10, 12?
Yeah, as long as it's under the direction of the parents.
Okay. When Gabby started school in the equivalent of 7th grade, they gave all the girls iPads.
Terrible.
That was the policy of this private school here in London. And they're like, and we were like, "Are you sure?" And they're like, "That's how we teach now. Everything goes on there." And they monitor them, they do the Wi-Fi thing, but you're not impressed with that.
I'm not impressed with it because my guess is that very quickly that iPad became a vehicle for social media and peer relationships rather than the intention, the educational intent of it.
Yeah.
And real teaching happens through personal contact, through engagement, through inviting and eliciting the kid's curiosity, through appealing to the child's increasingly sophisticated mind to hold complex ideas, contradictory ideas sometimes at the same time. Those depend on maturation, and that maturation depends on relationship with human beings. So I think if I was running the education system, I would introduce computers maybe in grade 11 or 12.
Okay.
And really, and kids wouldn't have missed anything because they can pick up like that how to use that stuff.
And write things longhand and
Yeah,
stuff. You're old school,
I would
Gabor.
still make them do mathematics. That would make their brains do work.
Okay.
I would have them define their own educational goals. I would have them do research. That doesn't appear at the click of a thumb.
Go to the library.
But they have to go to the library and they have to really look it up and get a sense of what it's like to really look for something. And then you give them the tools. Oh, now you can do this stuff. Here's a much easier way to do it. But it's not about the teaching. It's about what helps people, human being, develop into an autonomous, curious, self-motivated, individuated human being.
Yeah.
And virtually everything about digital media undermines those qualities.
Right.